I am not taking it. The room did not fall silent because Michael Corleone had raised his voice. It fell silent because he had not. His words were calm, almost gentle, yet they landed with more weight than any threat ever could. Across the long dining table, no one answered. Every face carried the same expression, not disbelief, but confusion. For years, whether anyone admitted it aloud or not, everyone had assumed the future had already been written. The youngest son, the quiet one who had once insisted he wanted nothing to do with the family business, would eventually become the man holding everything together. Michael had just erased that future with a single sentence. "I served my country because I believed a man should choose his own life." He continued, "I am making that choice now." His father watched him without interruption. Don Vito Corleone did not argue. He did not persuade. He simply studied his son's face as though searching for something hidden beneath the words. Kay sat beside Michael, her fingers wrapped tightly around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She had dreamed about this moment for years. A normal home. A quiet neighborhood. Children who would never grow up learning that every knock at the door carried meaning. She wanted to smile. Instead, an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. Because nobody else looked relieved. Tom Hagen lowered his eyes toward the table. Sonny leaned back with visible frustration, tapping impatient fingers against the wooden arm of his chair. "You think walking away makes you free?" Sonny finally asked. Michael met his brother's stare. "No, I think staying guarantees I never will be." Outside, the city carried on without noticing that one family had reached a crossroads. Cars rolled through Brooklyn streets. Store owners unlocked their doors. Neighbors greeted one another across sidewalks. To everyone else, nothing had changed. Inside the Corleone house, everything had. The meeting ended without a decision. There was no shouting, no dramatic farewell. Michael simply stood, kissed his father on the cheek, nodded politely to everyone else, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight beside Kay. For the first time in years, he felt he could finally breathe. "We can leave New York," Kay whispered as they reached the car. "We will. You really believe it is over?" Michael looked back once. The house stood exactly as it always had, proud and immovable, almost as if it had been there forever. It has to be. He believed those words. He wanted them to be true. Far behind the windows, Don Vito remained standing where his son had left him. Tom quietly approached. "Should we stop him?" The old man shook his head. "No." Another pause followed. Every father hopes his son can escape the life that trapped him. Tom waited. "But some lives are built like bridges," Don Vito said softly. "You only notice them when someone decides not to cross." That evening, the first phone call arrived. Not because Michael had left, because everyone else had learned that he had. An old business partner postponed an important meeting without explanation. A longtime ally suddenly became difficult to reach. Rumors spread faster than facts, each one slightly different from the last, but all carrying the same conclusion. The Corleone family no longer knew who would inherit its future. For competitors, uncertainty was an invitation. For friends, uncertainty was a reason to hesitate. For those inside the family, uncertainty became something even more dangerous. It became permission to make decisions on their own. Miles away, Michael unpacked a small suitcase inside a modest apartment he hoped would become the beginning of another life. He smiled as Kay placed a framed photograph on the shelf. Neither of them noticed the telephone ringing back in the old house for the 5th time that night. And with every unanswered call, the future Michael believed he had escaped quietly began moving toward him instead. Morning arrived with the illusion of normal life. Michael stood on the small apartment balcony, holding a cup of black coffee while the city slowly woke beneath him. Delivery trucks rolled through narrow streets. Children hurried towards school. Somewhere nearby, a radio played soft jazz through an open window. For the first time in years, nothing demanded his attention. Kay stepped outside carrying a cardboard box. "I found a place hiring history teachers," she said with a hopeful smile. "They are interviewing next week." Michael smiled back. "That sounds like a future." "It sounds like your future." Those words lingered longer than either of them expected. Meanwhile, across the river, another morning was unfolding very differently. The Corleone estate had never depended on one decision. It depended on everyone believing someone was always in control. Now that belief had begun to crack. Tom Hagen sat with several longtime associates around the conference table. normally. Discussions moved quickly because everyone understood where authority rested. Today, every suggestion ended with the same uncomfortable silence. What would Michael do? Nobody answered. Because Michael was gone. Sonny finally broke the silence. We cannot stop working just because my brother wants another life. His confidence sounded convincing. His certainty did not. A respected distributor requested extra guarantees before renewing an agreement. Another longtime partner suddenly claimed he needed more time to consider future cooperation. None of them openly challenged the Corleones. They simply waited. Waiting was often more dangerous than open opposition. Tom noticed the pattern immediately. They are testing us. They are afraid, Sonny replied. No. Tom folded his hands. They are uncertain. There was a difference. Fear could unite people. Uncertainty encouraged everyone to protect themselves first. Across the city, conversations unfolded inside restaurants, private offices, and quiet living rooms. No one celebrated Michael's departure. Instead, people began asking practical questions. Who would make the final decision? Who could settle disagreements? Who would guarantee promises made 6 months from now? In business, unanswered questions were expensive. Back at the apartment, Michael carefully unpacked another box. Inside lay military medals, old photographs, and a university textbook covered with handwritten notes from years before. Kay picked up the framed family photograph. You never told me this one was your favorite. Michael looked at it for a long moment. His father stood in the center. Sonny appeared impatient even in a still picture. Frito smiled awkwardly. Connie laughed at something outside the frame. Michael himself stood slightly apart, wearing a military uniform instead of a dark suit. I like that version of me, he admitted quietly. The man before all of this. The man who thought he could choose where his story began. The telephone rang. Neither of them moved immediately. It rang again. Michael answered. Tom's voice came through the line. I know you asked not to be involved. I did. I am respecting that. Another pause. But I wanted you to hear this from me before you hear it from someone else. Michael's expression slowly changed. What happened? Nothing irreversible. Then why are you calling? Because everyone has started making decisions without waiting for permission. Michael looked through the apartment window toward the distant skyline. That is not my responsibility anymore. I know. Tom's answer was almost a whisper. I just hope everyone else believes that. The call ended. Kay searched his face. You are not thinking about going back. No. You promised. I remember. He walked toward the window again. Far beyond the rooftop stood the city that had shaped every member of his family. He had left the house. He had left the meetings. He had left the expectations. Yet somehow, every conversation still found its way to him. Because while Michael had stepped away from the family, the empty space he left behind had begun changing everyone who remained. The next call came just before sunset. This time, Michael did not answer. He watched the telephone ring until the sound finally disappeared into the quiet apartment. Kay looked up from the stack of school applications spread across the kitchen table. You are getting better at ignoring it. I am trying. She smiled. No. You are practicing. There was a difference. Ignoring meant pretending something did not exist. Practicing meant resisting something that still held power. Michael understood that better than anyone. The following morning, he accepted an interview at a small college outside the city. The campus was peaceful, surrounded by old oak trees and brick buildings that seemed untouched by the endless negotiations, favors, and obligations he had known all his life. The department chairman welcomed him warmly. We are looking for someone who understands history beyond dates, the older professor said. History is really about choices. Michael almost laughed. If only it were that simple. As they walked across the campus, students crossed the courtyard carrying books instead of briefcases, debating philosophy instead of loyalty, arguing about literature instead of territory. For a brief moment, he could almost imagine belonging there. Then another conversation was unfolding miles away. Tom sat alone in Don Vito's office, reviewing reports that grew more troubling with every page. Nothing catastrophic had happened. That was precisely the problem. Small delays, minor disagreements, routine meetings postponed. Questions that once required minutes to resolve now stretched across entire days. The machinery still worked. It simply no longer moved together. Sonny entered without knocking. I settled the warehouse issue. Tom nodded. And the shipping contracts. They will wait. They have already been waiting. Sonny frowned. They know who we are. Tom looked directly at him. They knew who you were. Silence filled the room. Authority, Tom realized, was not simply inherited. It had to be believed. Once doubt entered the room, every decision became harder. That afternoon, an old family friend canceled a private dinner he had attended every month for nearly 20 years. No explanation, only apologies. Another banker suddenly requested additional documentation before approving financing that had never required questions before. Individually, none of these changes mattered. Together, they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. People were no longer betting against the Corleones. They were simply refusing to bet on them. Later that evening, Don Vito invited Tom into the garden. The old man poured 2 glasses of wine before speaking. When I was young, he said quietly, I believed power came from making people fear uncertainty. Tom listened without interrupting. I was wrong. What changed your mind? The older I became. Don Vito looked toward the empty chair where Michael often sat during family dinners. People can survive fear. Another pause followed. They cannot build a future on uncertainty. Tom understood exactly what he meant. Michael had not taken authority away. He had taken away certainty. Back in the apartment, Kay found Michael staring at the family photograph again. You have looked at that picture every night. I know. What are you searching for? Michael traced the edge of the frame with one finger. I used to think I was the only person standing outside the family. And now, I am beginning to wonder if everyone else was standing inside something I never understood. The telephone remained silent that night. For the first time in days, no messages arrived. No requests. No warnings. No news. The silence should have brought relief. Instead, it felt heavier than every conversation that had come before. Because silence did not always mean peace. Sometimes it meant people had stopped asking for guidance and had started acting on their own. And once enough separate decisions began moving in different directions, even the strongest family could find itself drifting toward a destination that nobody had ever chosen. Rain began falling just before dawn. Not the violent kind that forced people indoors. Just enough to blur the skyline and soften the edges of the city. Michael watched the weather through the apartment window while buttoning his jacket for another interview. You do not have to prove anything, Kay said as she adjusted his tie. I know. Then why do you look like you're walking into a trial? Michael smiled faintly. Maybe because every new beginning asks you to defend the life you chose. Before he could leave, another knock came at the door. Neither of them expected visitors. Michael opened it to find Tom Huggins standing quietly in the hall, rainwater still clinging to his overcoat. You found me. I was not looking very hard. Michael stepped aside. You should not be here. I agree. Tom entered without removing his coat, as though he already knew the conversation would not last. Kay excused herself to make coffee, leaving the 2 men alone. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Tom placed a thin folder on the kitchen table. I am not asking you to come back. Michael looked at the folder but did not touch it. Then why are you here? Because you deserve to know what your decision has changed. Michael remained silent. Tom opened the folder. There were no dramatic photographs. No secret reports. Only lists. Canceled meetings. Delayed agreements. Unsigned contracts. Longtime partners requesting time to reconsider. Communities quietly turning to other families for mediation because no one could tell them who truly spoke for the Corleones anymore. It is falling apart. Tom shook his head. No. What then? It is drifting. Michael frowned. There is a difference. Tom leaned forward. When something falls apart, everyone sees it. When something drifts, people barely notice until they cannot find their way back. Michael slowly turned the pages. Each item seemed insignificant on its own. Together they painted a picture that unsettled him far more than any obvious crisis could have. No betrayal. No catastrophe. Just confidence disappearing one conversation at a time. I left to stop this life from controlling mine. Tom nodded. I know. And now you want me to believe I caused this. I want you to understand something. Tom's voice remained calm. You did not create the uncertainty. You revealed it. Michael looked up. What does that mean? For years, everyone believed there would always be one person willing to carry the final responsibility. Tom paused before continuing. The day you walked away, they realized that assumption had never been guaranteed. Kay quietly returned with coffee, sensing immediately that this was no ordinary family visit. She listened without interrupting. Tom stood to leave. There is one more thing. Michael waited. Your father has not asked about business. He has not. No. What has he asked? Tom looked directly into Michael's eyes. He keeps asking whether you seem happy. The words lingered in the room long after Tom had gone. Late that afternoon, Michael drove alone without any destination in mind. Almost without realizing it, he found himself parked across the street from the neighborhood where he had grown up. Nothing looked different. Children still played on the sidewalks. Neighbors still greeted one another. An elderly shopkeeper swept the front steps exactly as he had years before. The streets appeared unchanged. Yet Michael now understood that places could remain the same while the invisible agreements holding them together quietly disappeared. He never left the car. He simply watched. As evening settled over the city, he noticed familiar faces entering and leaving buildings that had once depended upon his father's quiet authority. Now each conversation seemed slightly more cautious. Each handshake slightly shorter. Each glance carried one silent question. Who speaks for tomorrow? Michael rested both hands on the steering wheel. He had believed leadership was a position someone accepted. Now he was beginning to see it could also be an empty space that everyone else was forced to navigate around. When he finally returned home, Kay was waiting by the window. You went back. I never got out of the car. Did it help? Michael took a long breath before answering. I thought I was protecting us by leaving. He looked toward the family photograph resting on the shelf. For the first time, I am wondering whether protecting the people you love sometimes requires more than simply walking away. The interview offer arrived the next morning. A neatly typed letter. A steady salary. A classroom of students waiting for a professor instead of a successor. Kay read it twice before placing it carefully on the kitchen table. You earned this. Michael stared at the envelope without opening it again. It feels strange. What does? That my future can fit inside a single piece of paper. She walked closer and took his hand. Maybe that is what peace looks like. For several seconds, he almost believed her. Then the telephone rang once more. Neither of them spoke. Michael finally answered. It was Connie. Her voice sounded unusually controlled. I am not calling about business. I know. You always know. Another silence. I just wanted you to come to dinner. Michael closed his eyes. I do not think that is a good idea. It is Father's birthday. Those words settled heavily between them. You have not missed one since you came home from the war. Michael looked toward the unopened letter. I cannot. You mean you will not? The line went quiet. Before hanging up, Connie spoke one final sentence. Sometimes people stop coming home long before they stop loving their family. The connection ended. Kay watched him carefully. You are thinking about going. I am thinking about whether showing up changes everything again. Does staying away change nothing? He had no answer. That evening, Don Vito sat in the garden surrounded by familiar faces. The family laughed. Children ran across the lawn. Music drifted softly through the evening air. Everything appeared normal. Except one chair remained empty. Don Vito noticed it every time he looked across the table. He never mentioned it. Sonny filled conversations with confidence. Tom quietly kept discussions away from unfinished business. Everyone worked together to protect one peaceful evening. Yet every attempt to ignore the empty chair only made its absence more visible. After dinner, Don Vito slowly walked through the garden with Tom. When your children are young, he said, you spend years teaching them to stand on their own. Tom nodded. And then you discover that standing on their own means they can also walk away. Tom remained silent. The old man smiled gently. A father must accept both. Across town, Michael drove without realizing where he was going. The city lights reflected across the windshield. Street after street passed beneath him until he reached a familiar church. It was nearly empty. He stepped inside and sat alone in the last pew. No one recognized him. No one expected anything from him. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt honest. An elderly priest approached quietly. "You seem troubled." Michael offered a polite smile. "I thought leaving behind responsibility would make life simpler." And did it? It made life quieter. The priest considered that for a moment. Quiet and peace are not always the same thing. Michael lowered his eyes. "I wanted to stop becoming someone I never intended to be. And now, I cannot tell whether I escaped that man, or simply left other people to become him instead." The priest offered no advice, only a thoughtful nod. Sometimes understanding arrived long before solutions did. Later that night, Michael returned home to find another envelope waiting beneath the apartment door. Inside was no message, only a copy of a business agreement that had remained unsigned for weeks. Across the bottom, someone had written a single sentence in Tom's familiar handwriting. "No one knows who has the authority to say yes." Michael read the words again, then again. He suddenly realized that every problem Tom had shown him shared the same root. People were not waiting for orders. They were waiting for certainty. He had spent weeks searching for a way to help without stepping back into the life he had left behind. Letters, advice, private conversations, temporary arrangements. Each solution preserved his freedom. None restored anyone else's confidence. As dawn approached, Michael stood once again before the family photograph resting on the shelf. For the first time, he no longer saw 7 people posing for a camera. He saw a structure built over decades, held together by invisible trust. And he finally understood the question he had been asking in the wrong way. The real choice was no longer whether he wanted the responsibility. It was whether responsibility had already chosen him long before he believed he had the freedom to refuse. Michael did not sleep. The appointment letter remained on one side of the table. Tom's handwritten note remained on the other. Between them sat the family photograph. 3 different futures, separated by only a few inches. When dawn finally broke, Kay found him exactly where she had left him. "You have been here all night. I kept thinking there had to be another way. And..." Michael slowly shook his head. "The more I searched for another path, the more I realized I was searching for a miracle." Kay sat across from him. "You do not owe the world your life. No, you do not owe your family every dream you ever had." "I know. Then what is keeping you here?" Michael looked at the photograph. "When I left, I believed I was refusing power." His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Now I think I refused responsibility, and everyone else has been paying the price." Kay reached for his hand. "You cannot carry every burden. I am beginning to understand that this one was never mine alone." Another silence settled between them. "But it may still be mine to carry." That afternoon, Michael asked Tom to meet him, not at the family estate, but at a small Italian restaurant neither of them had visited in years. There were no bodyguards, no private room, just 2 men sitting by a window while the city moved around them. Tom ordered coffee. Michael never touched his. "I have been thinking about everything you showed me." Tom waited. "I kept asking the wrong question." "What was the wrong question?" "I kept asking whether I should return." Tom nodded slightly. "And now I am asking why everyone believed I could leave in the first place." Tom leaned back. "Because your father wanted that." Michael looked surprised. "He never wanted this life for me." "No." Tom smiled sadly. "That was the tragedy. He spent years building something strong enough to protect his family." Another pause. "But in the end, the strongest person inside that family was the one he hoped would never need to inherit it." Michael lowered his eyes. For the first time, he saw his father's silence differently. Don Vito had never argued, never demanded, never reminded him of duty. Perhaps because a father who truly loved his son could not force him to accept a burden he himself wished had never existed. Yet love did not erase consequences. Outside, people hurried through another ordinary afternoon. Inside the restaurant, Michael suddenly understood why every canceled meeting, every delayed agreement, and every uncertain handshake had followed the same pattern. The family had not lost money. They had not lost influence overnight. They had lost something far less visible: the certainty that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Without certainty, trust slowly unraveled. Without trust, every person protected only themselves. You know what frightens me most? Michael asked. Tom shook his head. That if I come back, I lose the life I wanted. And if you do not? Michael looked through the restaurant window. I may lose the reason I wanted that life in the first place. Neither man spoke again for several minutes. Words had carried them as far as words could. When Michael finally stood, Tom did not ask what he had decided. He already knew Michael was no longer the man who had walked away weeks earlier. That evening, Michael drove to the family estate. He stopped at the front gate. The house stood exactly as it had the day he left. Solid, quiet, unmoving. Yet Michael now understood that the building had never been the heart of the family. The heart was the invisible promise that someone would always accept the final responsibility when everyone else reached their limit. He remained inside the car as the sun disappeared behind the trees. He could still turn the engine on. He could still drive away. The road behind him led toward the peaceful life he had always wanted. The road ahead led toward sacrifices he had spent years trying to escape. For the first time since leaving, neither path looked like freedom. One asked him to abandon the family that had shaped him. The other asked him to abandon the man he had hoped to become. As darkness settled over the estate, Michael rested his hand on the steering wheel and quietly accepted the truth he had resisted from the very beginning. Some responsibilities do not arrive the day you accept them. They begin the moment everyone else believes only you can bear them. Michael never stepped out of the car. Not that night. The engine remained off, the windows slightly lowered, and the old house stood only a few yards away, illuminated by warm lights that made it seem almost untouched by everything that had changed. From a distance, it looked like home. From where he sat, it felt like history waiting for an answer. A figure appeared on the front porch. Don Vito. The old man walked slowly into the evening, carrying no coat despite the cooling breeze. He settled into a familiar chair overlooking the garden, as though he had expected no visitors and yet had been waiting all along. Michael watched his father without moving. The distance between them could have been crossed in less than a minute. Instead, it became the longest journey of his life. Inside the house, family voices drifted through open windows. Someone laughed. Someone called for more coffee. Someone closed a door. Ordinary sounds. The kind people rarely remember until they disappear. Michael suddenly realized that the family had never been held together by fear. It had survived because everyone believed there was always someone willing to place the family above himself. That belief had become the foundation beneath every promise, every partnership, every handshake. And foundations were invisible until they began to crack. His thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock against the driver's side window. It was Tom. I wondered how long you had been sitting here. Michael smiled faintly. Long enough. Tom glanced toward the house. He knows you are here. He does. He looked toward the gate 3 times. Michael let out a quiet breath. Why did he not come? Tom answered without hesitation. Because he has spent his whole life letting you make your own decisions. The words settled heavily between them. I thought choosing my own life meant walking away. Tom rested one arm against the open window. Maybe. And now you know that every choice leaves something behind. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Michael asked the question that had been following him since the day he left. If I return, does that mean I lose everything I wanted? Tom looked toward the house before answering. I do not think that is the right question anymore. What is? What happens to everyone else if you never do? Tom quietly walked back toward the porch, leaving Michael alone once again. The night grew darker. One by one, lights inside neighboring homes switched off. The Corleone house remained awake. Michael rested his head against the seat and closed his eyes. He remembered standing in his military uniform years earlier, convinced that discipline, courage, and sacrifice belonged only to battlefields. Now he understood something he had never learned in uniform. The hardest duty was often the one no one ordered you to accept. It was the one that slowly became yours because everyone else had already placed their hope there. When he opened his eyes again, he noticed the family photograph still lying on the passenger seat beside him. Earlier, he had seen 7 people. Now he saw something entirely different. Each face represented a promise made by one generation to the next. His father had carried that promise for decades, not because he desired power, because someone had to make certain tomorrow still existed for everyone else. Michael finally reached for the ignition key. His hand stopped halfway. The road home still waited behind him. The gate to the estate remained open ahead. For the first time, he no longer believed either road belonged only to him. Whatever he chose next would shape the lives of people who would never know this quiet moment had existed. The engine remained silent. The night held its breath, and somewhere beyond the open gate, an old father continued waiting without asking, trusting that the most important decision in his son's life could never be made by pressure alone, only by conviction.